Hey there, lovely soul. Welcome back to Noah's Stories. Have you ever wondered how one unexpected moment can rewrite a lifetime of silence? Today's story is about a man who had everything except love until one woman walked in and changed everything. Some stories begin in silence, but end in a love no one ever saw coming. Let's dive into this unforgettable journey. Ethan Kross, a wildly successful but emotionally reclusive CEO, had spent 3 decades building walls around his heart. His world revolved around numbers, contracts, and the towering glass windows that separated him from the life outside. Until Celeste Monroe arrived, a passionate young doctor with warmth in her voice and fire in her soul. What began as a simple workplace introduction became the spark that cracked through Ethan's carefully constructed armor. One night, one moment, one subtle touch on emotions long buried, and then a miraculous gift from a love neither of them ever expected. Ethan Kross stood alone in his 51st floor office at the top of Crossline Tower, a place where he could see everything yet touch nothing at all. The gleaming glass windows reflected a man just shy of 50, but with the weariness of 55. His salt and pepper hair was thick and neatly combed. His dark gray suit was immaculate. Everything about him was composed, except the hollowness in his chest. At 49, Ethan owned one of the world's largest tech empires, Crossline Technologies. He had built it from scratch, starting with an old computer in a dusty garage. But while his professional life soared to incredible heights, his personal life remained a barren, untouched wasteland. The media called him the ghost behind the company. Rarely seen in public, no dating rumors, no scandals, but look closer, and his eyes told a deeper story, not of arrogance, but of a man deeply wounded. Ethan's childhood had been a revolving door of foster homes. Rejection had shaped him. He learned early that feelings made you weak. Machines, on the other hand, made sense. They didn't lie, they didn't leave, they didn't betray. He had loved, briefly, and a few times. But each relationship ended with someone more interested in his fortune than the man behind it. So Ethan embraced solitude. He dined alone, slept alone, made billion-dollar decisions without asking anyone's opinion. He didn't let anyone get close, and he no longer hoped anyone ever would. Until one day, Celeste Monroe walked into the Crossline Tower on her first morning with a quiet mix of confidence and nerves. At 35, she was already a respected name in the world of regenerative medicine, having spoken at international conferences and published groundbreaking studies. But Crossline was a different universe. The global tech giant wasn't just well-funded, it was demanding, intense, and visionary. Celeste hadn't come for a title. She came for something far more personal. Years ago, she had watched her mother die in pain from a disease that today might be treatable with advanced regenerative therapies, if the research and funding had been there. From that moment on, she vowed to change that reality, to give others the chance her mother never had. With her curls pinned up and eyes sharp with focus, Celeste didn't look like a stereotypical scientist. She was a rare blend of intellect and emotion, of clinical brilliance and deep compassion. Her first encounter with Ethan Kross wasn't planned. As she was being shown around the research floors, Celeste accidentally bumped into a tall figure in the hallway. She crouched quickly to gather her scattered papers, then looked up and met a pair of amber eyes, deep and still like a lake before a storm. She had no idea she'd just collided with the legendary CEO, the man most employees had only seen in press articles or company-wide video calls. But Ethan, in that brief instant, already knew this woman was going to be unlike anyone he had ever met. After their first encounter, Ethan Kross found it impossible to shake Celeste Monroe from his mind. There was something about her eyes, the way she spoke to her team, the balance of intellect and empathy. She intrigued him. A quiet stir had entered a world that had long been ruled by data and decisions. He began showing up more frequently on the research floors, something that hadn't happened in years. His reasons were always official: inspecting new equipment, reviewing budget reports, assessing investment returns. But somehow, it was always when Celeste happened to be present. Celeste didn't think much of it at first. She found Ethan to be an unusual CEO, reserved, guarded, yet surprisingly insightful. He asked the kind of questions about her research that revealed a genuine understanding of medical science. Sometimes, he even offered perspectives she hadn't considered. She started looking forward to those moments when he appeared, even if he simply stood quietly behind the observation glass, arms crossed, listening intently. Her colleagues noticed. "He's been down here more in the last month than in the past 5 years combined," one researcher whispered. "And only when Dr. Monroe is present," another added with a knowing smile. Still, Ethan showed nothing. His expression remained neutral, his voice steady. Only his eyes softened, just slightly, when Celeste spoke. But every time he left those encounters, he'd return home, pull up her publications, and read, line by line, making notes. Not for business, but because he wanted to understand her, to find out why, after 30 silent years, his heart had started to beat again. The weekend retreat at High Ridge Research Lodge was supposed to be a group strategy session for the biomedical division, but as the snow began to fall and a series of last-minute cancellations trickled in, only 2 people showed up at the secluded wooden lodge in the mountains: Ethan Cross and Celeste Monroe. Both were surprised. Ethan frowned when he realized they were alone. Celeste tried to maintain a professional composure, but there was a guarded uncertainty in her eyes. Neither said it out loud, but they both felt it. This wasn't coincidence. This had been planned. The lodge was warm and cozy, a fire crackling in the stone hearth. The dining table was set for 2, candles flickering, a bottle of wine breathing beside fresh flowers, and a curated menu waiting to be served. Celeste let out a soft laugh. "This doesn't look like your average retreat." Ethan nodded, eyes still fixed on the fire as if hiding from something within himself. "Apparently not." Dinner began stiffly, with polite conversation and cautious glances, but somewhere between the first and second glass of wine, the walls began to come down. Ethan started talking, slowly at first, then honestly. He spoke of the foster homes, of learning early that the world wouldn't care for him unless he built something powerful enough to protect himself. He confessed that he had once believed emotions were liabilities, luxuries meant for people who hadn't been left behind. Celeste didn't interrupt. She listened with her whole heart. When he finished, she shared her own story, about the mother who had fought with unyielding strength against a disease that tore through her like wildfire. "I went into medicine," she said quietly, "because I couldn't bear the helplessness of watching someone I love suffer, while I stood there doing nothing." As she spoke, Ethan didn't see a doctor or an employee. He saw someone who had just pulled him out of 30 years of darkness, not with advice, but by simply being there, present, open, unafraid. They sat in front of the fire for hours, talking just enough to understand each other, silent enough to feel each other. At some point, Ethan reached out, tentatively touching her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. She held on. When Ethan kissed her that night, it wasn't impulsive. It was a confession that his heart, long dormant, had just been reawakened. And when Celeste kissed him back, it wasn't calculated. It was everything she had buried beneath lab coats and research grants finally breaking free. They didn't speak much after that. They didn't have to. That night wasn't about physical closeness. It was about 2 souls, both long convinced they were destined to walk alone, finally finding home in one another. One night, far from the city, and 2 hearts, finally seen, finally safe. After the retreat at High Ridge, Ethan and Celeste returned as different people. At work, they maintained professionalism, but their glances, their smiles, and the way they accidentally ended up on the same elevator spoke volumes. Ethan changed. He showed up more often in the research department, initiated conversations with staff, and even, on rare occasions, smiled. Celeste glowed with energy. Her research leapt forward with renewed drive. They began spending time together outside of work. Dinners, walks, shared moments of daily life. Slowly, the emptiness Ethan had carried for decades began to fill with Celeste's steady warmth and sincere presence. But then, the past came knocking. Lauren Blake, the one Ethan had ever publicly acknowledged, the one who had traded his trust for status, unexpectedly reappeared at a gala where Celeste was presenting on community health initiatives. With a flawless smile and a designer gown, Lauren approached Ethan while he sat alone. "You look happy," she whispered, lightly placing her hand on his arm. Cameras flashed instantly. The next morning, the photo was everywhere. Ethan Cross reunites with former flame. Celeste saw it before Ethan had a chance to explain. She didn't doubt his loyalty, but the old scars in her heart began to ache. Could she, someone who lived and breathed science, truly be the one to stand beside a man like Ethan in the long run? That same day, Celeste learned she was pregnant. Not with one, but with 2 lives growing inside her. Celeste said nothing after seeing the photo. She didn't question, didn't wait for an explanation. She quietly packed up her life and left. A week later, Ethan received her resignation through HR with no personal message. The letter stated she was relocating to Chicago for family matters and needed a more academic SOCUS environment. No one in the company knew she was pregnant, not even Ethan. He was confused, hurt, but still believed maybe she just needed time. He tried calling, texting, even writing a handwritten letter. She never replied. Celeste, meanwhile, knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't doubt Ethan's faithfulness, but she doubted her place in his world. She didn't want their child to grow up in a relationship shadowed by suspicion or whispers of favoritism. As her belly began to show, she took a position at a medical research institute in Chicago, living with her elderly aunt who was recovering from a stroke. She focused on her work, kept up with prenatal visits, and stayed far from headlines. Ethan, unaware of her pregnancy, quietly followed her professional achievements in academic journals. Part of him hoped she'd come back. Another part feared she was truly gone. And Celeste, every night, looked at his name on her phone screen and never had the courage to press dial. Ethan sat silently in his dim office, the glow of his computer screen casting shadows on his weary face. He still checked the funding reports for Celeste every week, still followed her research, even though she had no idea. Until one day, Dr. Raymond Hale, a former colleague of Celeste's, visited Crossline to discuss a project update. After the meeting, he lingered, looking Ethan directly in the eyes. "You know," he said, "Celeste didn't leave because of her job. She left because she believed you didn't want her, or your children." Ethan froze. "Children?" he repeated, voice barely audible. Raymond nodded. "Twins. She found out right after the gala. You didn't know, did you? She thought your text, 'Whatever you decide,' was your way of stepping away." It felt like a punch to the chest. Ethan imagined Celeste, alone, pregnant, facing judgment, fear, and heartbreak, while he remained silent. That same day, he booked the first flight to Chicago. Rain poured down as he arrived at her building. An older neighbor recognized him. "She's inside, you should go to her." He stepped into the apartment, soaked to the bone, heart pounding. There she was, standing in the living room, belly visible now, eyes wide with shock and emotion. "How did you get in?" she asked, voice shaking. "You forgot. My heart never left," he whispered. Then he dropped to his knees and placed his hand gently on her stomach where 2 tiny lives were growing. Tears slid down his face. "I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to begin again, if you'll let me." Celeste didn't speak. She simply placed her hand over his. And for the first time in 3 months, the silence gave way to hope. Celeste said nothing as Ethan rested his hand on her belly, but in that silence, there was no more pain, only possibility, a quiet invitation, a door slightly open. Ethan remained on his knees, offering her not just an apology, but his entire future. "I'm not here to explain," he whispered. "I'm here because I can't imagine any future that doesn't include you and our children." Celeste placed a hand on his shoulder, neither pulling him in nor pushing him away. "I thought your silence meant you didn't want this," she said softly. "That message, it cut deep." "I know," Ethan said, voice rough. I just didn't know how to say the right thing. A long pause. Then she took his hand and placed it gently back on her belly, where two tiny lives stirred. I don't know where we're going, she said, but I know I don't want to go there alone. There were no grand kisses, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet choice. And it was enough. The following weeks passed like a quiet symphony. Ethan relocated to Chicago and began working remotely. He converted the corner of Celeste's living room into an office. Sometimes, mid-call, he'd pause just to fetch her water, rub her feet, or simply smile at her. Because he could. Celeste continued her research at Northwestern, now steadier, now lighter. She wasn't walking this path alone anymore. They went to appointments together, chose baby names, painted the nursery. Celeste marveled at the man who once lived in suits, now in a wrinkled t-shirt, holding a paint roller with messy hair and eyes lit up like a boy. They still disagreed, still debated, but now they listened, because now they were more than individuals. They were a family. 3 months later, they held a small wedding in the backyard of their new home. No press, no champagne, just wildflowers, wooden chairs, a few cherished friends, and 2 hearts that had once wandered, now home. Celeste wore a simple white dress, belly full at 7 months. Ethan never let go of her hand, as if releasing it might unravel everything they had rebuilt. I spent 30 years not believing in love, Ethan said during his vows. But it only took one person, you, to make me believe again. 2 months later, Emma and Lila arrived, tiny wonders with their mother's eyes and their father's stubborn brow. On the first night, they both fell asleep on his chest. Ethan didn't speak. He only whispered, barely audible. Thank you for not giving up on us. Celeste, smiling, whispered back. We didn't start perfect, but I think this is the most perfect it's ever been.